Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Heyman. I'm a senior transportation planner with Public Works, and I'm joined here by my colleague.
My name is Trey Durner. I'm an associate transportation planner with Public Works.
And both of us thank you for tuning in to this recorded presentation for the Bryant Avenue Reconstruction Project. In this presentation, we're going to be going over some project background, project goals, our engagement to date. We'll introduce some new concept designs for both Bryant Avenue South and Lyndale Avenue South from Lake Street to 50th. And we'll go over next steps and how you can participate going forward. So a note about communication, continually as throughout we've been doing through this COVID-19 pandemic, all project communication is going to continue to be virtual or over to the phone. However, we are going to take a new approach to emails. I'll say that given some COVID-related staffing challenges over the last couple months, we became overwhelmed with the number of emails that we've received from stakeholders, and we did a poor job responding to them in a timely manner. So if you're out there and you've been waiting for a response and are frustrated by that, I apologize. We just couldn't keep up. So due to that, to try and address that issue, we're going to be taking a new approach where we'll be asking folks to send in comments via emails. We have read all your emails. We've taken that feedback, incorporated it into some of the changes and the materials we have for you today. So if you're interested in still sending us comments via email, that's fantastic. If you're looking for specific answers and responses, we do ask that you call us. And we'll have that in the email response going forward. We're going to be setting office hours. So my office hours are from 2 to 3 p.m. on Monday. You can see my phone number there. Trey will have office hours on 1 to 2 p.m. on Fridays. That'll be through the end of the project until it goes to City Council layout review. Please give us a call. We'll be available during those times. We'll give you a call back if you get a busy signal. And we'll be able to just get answers to you much faster than we were able to do in this previous round via email. The other thing we wanted to note as the city is facing two dual crises. The city of Minneapolis has declared racism a public health emergency within the city of Minneapolis. And this just really tough time for our city. We appreciate you taking the time to join us to talk about street redesign. I'll say that at Public Works, we talk a lot about protecting our most vulnerable street users, but we also know based on our data that our residents who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color don't experience street safety and are vulnerable street users as well. They don't experience street safety in the same way as our white residents. So as a white resident of Minneapolis, I look forward to the challenging, difficult, and necessary conversations to come as we work together to building a more equitable and racially just city.
Thanks, Liz. So now I will go on and kind of go over a bit of the project background and the material that we presented on in previous open houses and go over city policy and the process of successful design. So what is the Bryant Avenue South Reconstruction Project? It is a reconstruction of Bryant Avenue South from Lake Street to 50th Street. And the reconstruction project is undertaking where the city has an opportunity, and stakeholders and residents have an opportunity to reimagine our right-of-way. And our right-of-way on Bryant is back of sidewalk to back of sidewalk, which is about 60 feet. For most of the corridor, we know in some places that 60 feet is constrained by encroachment, which are like retaining walls, trees, or fences. And so the city of Minneapolis will do its best to work within our effective right-of-way, avoiding some of those encroachments. So why are we reconstructing? Bryant Avenue South is a 60-year-old street. It is experiencing some pavement degradation over the years due to its the nature of the age of the street. And we also know that 60 years ago, when this street was built, that it operated in fall uses from a different time period. And as Bryant operates now, there are multiple nodes along Bryant. We have a bicycle facility along Bryant. We have parking lanes and business nodes. And as we undertake this reconstruction, we seek to build the street, revision the street for what it may, the uses it may accommodate in the future. So as far as the project schedule, starting off last year, in spring, we had a kickoff open house where we started the goals and visioning for the project. And then we had our second open house in December of last year. We introduced our draft concept design. And all of that and where we are now is what we would call the concept design process. And then as we move into 2021 and later on in this year, we'll approach detailed engineering design, where we would presumably have a city-adopted concept layout for the corridor. And then on into 2022 and 2023, this project is planned to be phased through its reconstruction or construction, meaning it'll be constructed over 2 years. We don't know what half of the corridor will be constructed first. That's normally details that are figured out during detailed engineering design, as I mentioned, after there is a council-approved layout. So a little bit more on concept design. It's essentially establishing the basic elements of the street, what we will be including as we move forward with concept design in the future. And so concept design is a combination of city policy, technical analysis, and stakeholder feedback. City policy, I'll kind of touch on the next slide. Our technical analysis is all our bicycle counts, our parking counts, our other modal counts along the corridor, some speed information that we've collected, as well as the number of our average annual daily traffic, or the number of cars traveling along the corridor. And we combine that with city policy and our stakeholder feedback to get a concept design. A little bit more on the city's policy. I'll kind of briefly speak on each of these. City of Minneapolis has its complete streets policy, which tells us to design for vulnerable road users, most primarily. There also is the street design guide, which informs project managers on how to undertake design for future reconstruction projects. There's also the 20-year street funding plan, which is the city's policy document or an ordinance to inform how we select streets to be included in our 6-year capital improvement program. There's the Americans with Disabilities Transition Plan, which essentially is a plan to eliminate all barriers across the city to walking and rolling. The city also has its declaration of climate emergency, which tells us when we undertake reconstruction projects of this scope, that we ensure that they do not have an undue impact on the environment. And then there's the Transportation Action Plan and the Vision Zero Action Plan. The Transportation Action Plan is a 10-year plan that guides how the city will build out its modal networks. And then the Vision Zero Action Plan is the city's plan to eliminate all severe and fatal traffic crashes on city streets by 2027. So a bit more on some of the project goals that are informed by city policy. For the Bryant project, one of our goals are to improve pedestrian safety and access and comfort, create an all ages, all abilities bicycle connection in the area. This is language, all ages, all abilities bicycle connection. That's language that's enumerated in the Transportation Action Plan, which essentially means creating a bicycle facility that's comfortable for a wider range of cyclists, not just those who are more comfortable riding in the street and under duress, but comfortable for those who need a calmer or wider facility. We also have the goal to support existing and future transit service in the area, and Liz will talk more about that as she goes over the proposal for LYNDALE Avenue South. And then there's the use green infrastructure and collect, the goal to use green infrastructure and collect and treat stormwater runoff. This is a rather new goal that Public Works is including on the forefront of projects reconstruction or concept design. And then there's also accommodate business deliveries and customer access. And we know along Bryant, we have a number of business nodes, and they also have their needs at those intersections and along Bryant, and we want to ensure that we're accommodating those on the forefront of our conceptual design process. So a bit more on our phases of engagement. As I mentioned earlier, last year we had a kickoff, which was a project introduction and kind of goal setting for how we'll move forward with the reconstruction. And then as we transition from round 1 to round 2, where we put out our draft concept, the conceptual design, showing a 2-way on Bryant and the proposal to move transit over to LYNDALE. Then after round 2 and where we are now is round 3, where we refine that concept design, and we'll seek to further engage with the community and eventually reach a point where we would go to round 4, where we would have a recommended public works conceptual design for the corridor. Following that, seeking council approval of the conceptual design. So who we've talked to over the course of round 1 and round 2 are more than 40 businesses along the corridor, a number of neighborhood groups, and corridor residents. We understand that during this global pandemic, it's very, very challenging to reach out to everyone along the corridor, both Bryant and LYNDALE. And so we've offered a number of virtual open houses with question and answer sessions for residents and stakeholders to interact with project managers. Virtual group discussions, which we hosted 6 of these in January, and we will continue to host these for round 3 as well. We've offered project feedback maps where in round 1, we enabled folks to see the corridor of Bryant and kind of click and select and put in their comments relating to a couple of subject areas. We also have offered 2 online surveys, and we also have an online survey posted on the website today for folks to review the conceptual designs, but also answer that survey that relates to those. And as Liz mentioned, we also are offering discussion hours and have offered those in the past, as well as our project phone calls and emails that we will continue to try our best to respond to. And I say that to say we want to continue all these conversations as we continue through round 3 of engagement. So what we heard in round 1, where we have our corridor visioning and project goals, we understand that Bryant Ave South is a constrained corridor. It has a number of modes operating on the corner. We have corridor, we have transit, we have bikes, we have pedestrians, and vehicles all operating on this very constrained corridor. We also heard that stakeholders want to prioritize vulnerable street and sidewalk users. Bryant doesn't have any boulevards, and it's in some places very, very uncomfortable to traverse the corridor by walking and rolling. We've also heard a need to de-emphasize the space allocated to vehicles. Bryant has 2 travel lanes and 2 parking lanes, but also add in greening, kind of speaking more to that kind of comfortability of the pedestrian. And we've also heard that there's a need to maintain business node parking. We understand that businesses have a need for deliveries and other types of operations that conducive to their continued operation. But I also want to highlight 2 common stakeholder priorities that weren't represented as project goals, and those were to maintain vehicle access along the corridor and maintain on-street parking. So after hearing what we heard back in round 1, what we did, kicking off in round 2, where we presented the draft concept, was evaluate the concepts based on common stakeholder priorities. Those priorities I mentioned earlier about maintaining vehicle access and maintaining on-street parking. We evaluated the bike facility and the ped-bike conflicts. So we heard from stakeholders that there's concern around the potential for conflicts with bikes and pedestrians on off the curb, where we had a off-street trail and a shared use trail in the concept we presented in December. And then we also presented our draft concept that reflected the city's best foot forward by reinforcing city policy and project goals. And so as we kicked off round 2 and transitioned into round 3, what we heard was an overall need to better balance between on-street parking, bicycle facilities, and just overall corridor design. As I mentioned earlier, Bryant is a constrained corridor, and there's a need to prioritize certain modes along that corridor. And as I mentioned earlier, Liz will talk more about this as it relates to the proposal to move transit from Bryant to LYNDALE. But we also heard, and this is one of the more important feedback, one of the most important, I would say one of the more important feedback tidbits was the feedback we received implied a strong desire for an alternate option along Bryant Avenue South. And Liz will talk more about that as he presents the concept for a one-way along Bryant. So also what we heard in round two, as I mentioned, it included the proposal to move transit from Bryant to LYNDALE. Overall, there's a mixed feedback regarding moving transit. Some supported the proposal to move transit, but there's also some desire to keep transit service on Bryant. Some of the concerns with moving transit to LYNDALE was the impact to car travel and vehicle delay that concept could present. There's also a lack of specificity with the proposal, and we will kind of go in more in depth on that in this presentation. But also, we heard that there's there's significant difficulty of pedestrian crossings along LYNDALE, and we'll be kind of addressing that in the concept that we have to do today. So a little bit more on the one-way street option and the feedback that we heard about applying a different alternative along Bryant. As you can see here, in our round two survey, we presented the question, what do stakeholders and residents feel about a one-way on Bryant? There is some concern about the speed of car traffic that would presumably travel on this one-way. And there was also just some uncertainty about what the one-way design would mean for pedestrians, bicyclists, and cars. And so one of the things we gathered from not only this survey, but from the open houses and emails and just discussions we've had with residents and stakeholders is that there's enough interest in presenting the one-way concept that we'd like to explore further as far as presenting a concept design. So as I mentioned, Liz will talk a little bit more on that in just a moment.
Thanks, Trey. So as Trey said, we took in all our stakeholder feedback. We reviewed emails, comments through both rounds of engagement, lots of conversations with folks about what they're looking to see on LYNDALE. And we reviewed all that information and our concept plans. And we went back to our concept evaluation framework to double check everything. And for those of you, following along from the beginning, we had three big main concepts that we had looked at. The first one was the squeeze it in, where we tried to keep transit, bicycle, infrastructure, cars, pedestrians, everything all together on Bryant. You can see that it didn't score very well when we evaluated it based on some of these red and yellow dots all the way up and down here. The second option was looking at bicycles on Bryant, which in the last round, was our draft proposal that we brought out in detail. And then based on the stakeholder feedback, as Trey said, we worked out in detail a one-way option and evaluated that as well. And you can see here that starts to rise to the top when you start evaluated against project goals and stakeholder priorities. And then lastly, we looked at an option for transit on Bryant, where we'd keep transit on Bryant and move a bicycle facility to an adjacent street. When we reviewed our evaluation and stakeholder feedback, we're still feeling strongly that the bicycles on Bryant is the best option to meet project goals and stakeholder priorities. And after our technical evaluation of the one-way option, Public Works draft proposal now looks to support the one-way option on Bryant as the best way to balance all these needs. Next slide, please, Trey. So that's what we're here in the second half of this presentation. We'll go through the details of both the Bryant Avenue options, the two options, which are two-way for cars and versus a one-way for cars, and then provide some more detail and information on the concept for LYNDALE. So first, for the details on the draft transit proposal on LYNDALE, as Trey mentioned, folks were looking for much more specificity. We agreed with that. If you check out our project website, you can see full details for what we're proposing on LYNDALE. We're proposing to move 6 routes, 3 local and 3 limited stop routes from Bryant to LYNDALE. When we're proposing a combination of 15 new stops, both pullout and in lane. And when we move things over to LYNDALE, we do get more room for transit amenities, such as bus shelters, and more room for folks to wait while they're waiting for the bus. The one thing to note here is that we are proposing to keep the Route 23 and the Route 114 on Bryant to serve Walker Methodist's front door. And I can talk a little bit more about that, about how that impacts our Bryant proposals. But first, kind of staying on LYNDALE here, first thing to note is that there are minimal changes to typical travel times on LYNDALE. We had a lot of questions about congestion and what that would mean. But based on our traffic modeling and the existing data that we have, we believe that transit times and travel times for a personal vehicle from 50th to Lake Street will change very minimally under this proposal. And you can see here that these are existing travel times today in the PM peak, so that's the evening rush hour. It's the busiest time in this corridor. And then we modeled out what transit would look like and what traffic would look like on LYNDALE in the year 2040. So that means we take proposed land uses, put them into our modeling software, run it with existing and projected traffic counts based on those land uses, and here are our results. So we both modeled it without transit and with transit in this corridor. And you can see that, yes, based on our assumptions, we put in fairly conservative assumptions based on this corridor. Yes, travel times will go up based on existing when you compare them to existing. But when you compare with and without transit, the typical travel time in this corridor is only going to see a difference of 15 to 16 seconds. I'm not going to tell you that if you end up behind a bus under this proposal, that your travel time may be longer as you wait for people to get on and off. But a typical travel time for someone traveling the full length of this corridor, you're just not going to see that much difference under this proposal. The other thing we wanted to highlight is that under the proposal, there are very minimal changes to the curb line. So you can see in this picture on the left what a typical transit stop will look like under this proposal. At most of these locations, the only change that we're doing is adding these small pieces of sidewalk to connect back into the typical sidewalk there. So we're not changing or doing a lot of work to the curb. So when you go to our website, you check out the LYNDALE concept. If you see something that looks like the intersection on the right, where you just have a couple little pieces of orange sidewalk, that is the extent of the changes that we're proposing with this project. So there are a couple of locations where we're proposing larger changes. And at 3 locations, we're proposing pedestrian medians at 45th, 41st, and 37th. And this was in direct response to the feedback we heard about, concerns of pedestrians crossing LYNDALE, especially at intersections that don't have a traffic signal. So all of these 3 locations here, they don't have traffic signals, but we're also proposing a transit stop at these locations. So to help people cross more safely, we are proposing a closed median. So you can see an example of what that looks like on the right-hand side. What this means is that, pedestrians, it's the highest level of protection for pedestrians for this type of design to have it closed. But it also means is that traffic movements at these intersections are limited. So this is a right in, right out design. So folks no longer will be able to go directly across LYNDALE at these locations, nor would they be able to make left turns. However, based on our data that we have, the movements at these intersections, first of all, are already low to begin with for the entire intersection, and the straight through and the left turn movements represent about 2 to 3% of entire traffic movements at this intersection. So we believe that these impacts will be fairly minimal, but if you live here, this will be a change. The other location that has the most or more intense improvements would be changes to 50th and LYNDALE. So I'm sure a lot of you know are listening, 50th and LYNDALE is a fairly tight intersection. to enable us to get buses through here onto 50th and onto Lyndale. We do have to make some curb line changes. So you can see in the beige is where we're proposing making changes to the curb line. But the biggest change that folks would notice would be on the northeast corner, where we have to pull the curb back to make room for a bus stop on that corner. All the other corners are going to look fairly similar. We're going to maintain sidewalk widths, but the changes that people will notice will be on that corner here. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Taking a look at a picture of existing conditions from Google Street View, the changes folks will notice is that this median would need to be removed, and we'd need to pull the bus stop, the curb back here, which will have an impact to 1 to 2 mature trees, and we'd have to move this signal back to make room for this. So the 50th and Lyndale intersection is the intersection where we'd see the most changes to curb lines on Lyndale. The other thing to note is that this project is proposing a mix of pullout and in-lane stops to make this proposal work. So a pullout stop is a stop where the bus is traveling down the street and then actually pulls out of the lane of traffic to let people on and off. An in-lane stop is where the bus stops in the lane of travel, so people can get on and off the bus, and the bus just remains there, and folks driving behind will have to wait until the bus moves. We are proposing in-lane stops at 7 intersections, all of those intersections being south of 40th. You can take a look at our detailed plans to see exactly where those are. But again, our traffic modeling shows that this type of design will work and has minimal impacts to a typical travel time in this corridor. The last thing to note is about how this proposal supports existing and future transit on Lyndale. So the Lyndale Avenue corridor is a candidate for arterial bus rapid transit implementation prior to 2040. So it's a midterm priority now for Metro Transit. And this is one of the driving factors for why we're proposing to move transit from Bryant to Lyndale, because we know that as we set curb lines on Bryant for the next 50 years, it's imperative that we understand how we're going to have a transit supportive corridor for somewhere in the Southwest Minneapolis area, and Lyndale, with its wider right of way, and since it doesn't have a bicycle facility, makes it easier to plan for this transit upgrade as Metro Transit continues to roll out and build out their arterial bus rapid transit network. So moving over to the Bryant corridor, we're going to introduce just a high-level look at our 2 options. Again, you can check out our website for the full details. So those 2 options, as I mentioned, are a one-way for vehicles versus an adjusted 2-way for vehicles. So starting with our adjusted 2-way concept. So back in December, we brought out a 2-way concept. We still have that on the table today. This concept is fairly similar to what we brought out previously. So it includes 2 lanes for vehicle traffic. South of 40th, it includes a shared use path, which you can see on this top block example here. So that means that bicyclists and pedestrians share the same space. And then north of 40th, where we have higher existing bicycle and pedestrian counts and expect those to remain high, we split out our trail from our pedestrian space. Obviously, that has the trade-off when we put in parking at these locations that you just don't get a lot of green space out of this option, nor can you fit in a large amount of parking when you're trying to prioritize that green space. But the biggest change that you see is that we've added 14 total parking spaces back in. Specifically wanted to note that we've added them in at the blocks that had no parking. We heard fairly strongly that people were not interested in having blocks with no parking whatsoever. But when we reviewed our project goals, stakeholder priorities, we do think that the 2-way option, as it was drawn up originally, was pretty close and needed to support all of those goals and priorities and balance them in a way that didn't take away from what we were trying to do on this corridor. So Not a lot of changes, but some to respond to the feedback that we heard on this design. The one thing that's different with transit on this adjusted two-way concept is that we are recommending keeping the Route 23 and the Route 114 to provide front door service to Walker Methodist. So you'll see that in this proposal as well, in the adjusted two-way is a change to look for between the blocks of 38th and 36th. Now to go to the one-way. So, heard a lot of feedback, as Trey mentioned. This option is our take at trying to rebalance in a different way to try and meet project goals, stakeholder priorities, and reimagine our right-of-way to balance those to the best of our ability. So this one-way concept does have a set of opportunities and challenges, just like every concept at Public Works. But opportunities for this one is that we're able to provide separate space for bicyclists and pedestrians throughout this whole corridor. So the shared use path is removed in this option. We're able to provide large spaces for green infrastructure and get into some of those numbers, what the difference looks like. And we're able to provide more parking with this option. The challenges are going to be side street traffic impacts, and I can talk about those in more detail here. But first, kind of the thing to note is that this proposal includes a converging one-way design. So we're proposing that Bryant would be one-way for vehicles northbound from 50th to 46th, and then southbound from Lake to 46th. Two big reasons why we're proposing this converging one-way design. If we go to the next slide, please. So the first is that there's an existing traffic pattern down by 50th and Bryant that has Aldrich as a converging one-way design that exists already. And having this be northbound allows us to, keep that traffic pattern that helps with traffic circulation and discourages cut-through traffic in the neighborhood. So keeping Bryant northbound here helps us maintain that traffic pattern. The other thing that this helps us with is on the right-hand side here, you can see a picture out in front of Clara Barton School. So kids getting on and off the bus. With a southbound one-way in this area, we're able to make sure that the bus door stays on the right-hand side, stays right next to the sidewalk. So we don't have kids getting off the bus and having to cross behind the bus or cross the street. So a southbound was really critical to keep that loading pattern in front of Clara Barton. So those are the two big reasons why we're proposing that converging one-way in this concept. Looking at the two typical cross sections that you'll see if you hop onto our website, take a look at those plans. The first typical is you can see at the top is a two-way bicycle trail plus a sidewalk and then two-sided parking. So again, we can fit in more parking here. So you can see, two parking lanes and a singular through lane with pretty healthy boulevards that support tree growth. On the typical section on the bottom, you'll see that we have one side of parking with a 12-foot through lane. And very wide boulevards here, more than typical. We got 7.5-foot boulevards, and then again, a separate space for bicyclists and pedestrians. So those are the two most common cross sections that you'll see when you take a look at the plans. So getting into more details on those opportunities and challenges. As I mentioned, the big challenge with this one will be that there are likely going to be side street traffic impacts to our residential streets. However, we believe that these are going to be fairly modest in nature based on our traffic modeling in this area. So, when you remove a vehicle lane of traffic, we expect that traffic to go somewhere. We expect to see an additional 20 to 35 vehicles per hour in the most, busiest times of the peak hour, afternoon rush hour. So we expect that increase to happen on Kings Highway, Colfax, and Aldrich. Fairly modest increase, but if you're home during that hour, it could be something that you notice that feels different on those side streets. We also expect some of the traffic to move to LYNDALE, and we expect to see an additional 65 to 100 vehicles per hour under this proposal. However, given that LYNDALE has a range about 14,000 to 10,000 vehicles per day, we don't expect that an additional 65 to 100 trips would be something that people would be able to notice on LYNDALE. Back to the opportunities. So with this one-way concept, as I mentioned, we do fully separate out space for bicycle and pedestrians based on a lot of feedback we heard. So on the left, you'll see the multi-use path, not a part of our one-way design. On the right side, you can see an example of what it would look like to have separate trail and sidewalk facility in this corridor. And that is one of the big things that we gain with this one-way design. The next thing we gain is more opportunities to invest in green infrastructure on Bryant Avenue. You can see on the table that in our revised two-way design, we have about 2.7 acres of green space. However, under the one-way design, we gain more than half an acre. And not only do we gain that half an acre, but we gain it in the locations where we need it most and where it's the highest opportunity. So for example, you can see some of our previous work where we mapped out our biggest opportunity areas for green infrastructure on Bryant. So this block between 32nd and 31st is the example I'll use. If we could go to the next slide. So this is one of our opportunity areas, and the difference here, you can see the two-way at the top and the one-way at the bottom. And under the two-way, we have about 7,300 square feet of green space, but with the one-way, that bounces up to 9,700-ish. So almost an increase of 2,500 square feet in green space in an opportunity area that needs it the most and allows us to make the biggest and the investments that we need in green infrastructure in this corridor. Then the last thing that we gain here is the ability to put in more parking. So you can see this example block. This is 46th through 45th. On our adjusted two-way revised design, we're able to squeeze in 14 parking spaces. And you can see it still, it means a shared use path. It means pretty narrow boulevards. However, under the one-way, we're able to maintain boulevards that are wide enough to support tree growth, but also have parking on both sides for more than half of the block. And we can fit in 23 spots. So it's a good way to balance the needs here in this corridor. Another technical piece here, just like the two-way, on the one-way design, we're proposing to keep some front door transit service to Walker Methodist. Where we'll keep the Route 23 and the Route 14 for the blocks between 38th and 36th Street. And the way we're proposing to do this is with a transit contraflow lane. So in these blocks, you'll see 2 lanes for traffic, and it means transit only can go northbound on these blocks. And that transit also encompasses Metro Mobility and some of the vans that the Walker uses to transport their residents. So we felt it was very important and able to, keep again Metro Mobility loading with their door in the right direction at Walker Methodist, so residents don't have to cross the street to access their homes. So just one, technical thing to note as you're looking and you see, 2 travel lanes in this location. So a lot of details, much more. I really encourage people to check out the layouts. But one thing you can do to kind of get a feel for the corridor, we've spray painted our proposed one-way concept typical cross section out in the world at 49th, 40th, and 42nd Street. So you can go see and kind of helps me visualize anyway what this corridor might look like. So I do encourage you to go check that out, as well as take a look at the website. And some notes on how you can participate going forward. So we are rescheduling our virtual open house. Please sign up for email alerts to get the exact day. We're working on when that can can happen. For those of you who have made it the whole way through this presentation with us, do note that it'll be a repeat of this information, but there will be a Q&A via chat box at the end. You can also sign up for our small group conversations. We had those last time. It's a an open conversation with staff through video chat. So you can sign up. There's a link here, and you can see it on our project website. Please sign up for those to have those conversations. And you can also provide us feedback via our online survey, which is up on the website as well. So thanks for joining us. We look forward to continuing this conversation and hearing from residents, stakeholders, business owners on how we can continue to balance the project goals and stakeholder priorities. And looking forward to continuing that conversation. Thanks very much for listening.